At 4:16 a.m., my husband's sister called. "It's Alex," she whispered. "He's in the hospital." But it wasn't an accident, and he wasn't unconscious. By 7 o'clock, I knew the call wasn't about concern, it was a warning. My husband had tried to disappear, and he wanted me to take the fall. When I pulled into the hospital parking lot that morning, I hadn't slept in 36 hours. My phone was dead, my hands were shaking, and all I had in my bag were keys, an old protein bar, and a folder I hadn't planned to open yet. But that wasn't the point. What mattered was that I arrived alone. No one came to meet me in the lobby. No one offered directions. The woman at the front desk barely looked up before gesturing toward the east wing. I found room 412 by instinct, not signage. I opened the door slowly, expecting chaos. Instead, I found Alex sitting upright in bed, fur in his arm, fully dressed under the blanket, staring out the window like this was just another morning. He turned his head. "You came." I didn't answer. I stepped inside, heart pounding, jaw locked. "You shouldn't be here," he added. "That's what you said the last time. Right before I got locked out of our joint accounts." He looked away, rubbing his wrist absently, the plastic hospital band catching the light. "They're saying things, Mia. About you. That you pressured me. That you were controlling." I let the silence grow sharp. Then I asked, "Did you tell them that?" He didn't respond. His pause told me enough. "I found the revised contract," I said. "The one you submitted to the firm last Friday. With my name removed from all advisory rights." Now he looked at me. Not angry. Not guilty. Just tired. "That was the deal, right? You fake a breakdown, get public sympathy, and I disappear as the problematic wife." "Mia." "No, listen." I pulled the folder from my bag and dropped it on his lap. "That's your signature on the trust documents. The original ones. Dated, time-stamped, notarized. You forgot I keep backups." He didn't touch the papers. "I was supposed to vanish quietly," I continued, my voice lowering, "but then you made a mistake. You tried to turn the people who actually loved me into your alibi. You dragged them into your lie." He laughed once, dry and bitter. "No one loves you, Mia. They just fear you." It stung. Not because it was true, but because he believed it. I leaned in, close enough for him to see the steel in my eyes. "You just tried to erase the wrong person." He looked away again, jaw twitching. I left the hospital without another word. 3 hours later, I walked into the office I hadn't set foot in for weeks. My badge still worked. No one stopped me. Either no one knew what was happening or no one wanted to get involved. It didn't matter. I went straight to archives. The file I needed was buried under a fake label, Westfall Development, legal drafts. But inside, it held every version of the Vaughn Trust Amendments, including the one I had drafted with Alex 2 years earlier, when we were still pretending to be partners. Back then, we promised to keep joint oversight. "Equal say, equal risk," he'd said. A lie that aged poorly. I scanned the pages, emailed copies to myself, then wiped the local folder clean. I walked out with a flash drive in my pocket and a new purpose in my chest. They wanted a narrative? I'd give them one. Just not the one they'd written. By 6 p.m., I was back in my apartment. Not the house. The house was his now, his and Lauren's. The woman he swore was just a friend, the one who conveniently moved in 4 days after I left. I didn't cry when I found out. I didn't scream. I started building a case. Lauren wasn't just a fling, she was CFO of a rival firm. A conflict of interest so glaring, our board would implode if they knew. Which they would. Tomorrow. That night, I drafted the email. Attached proof. Labeled every file. Lined up timelines, account statements, and the internal memo Lauren had accidentally CC'd me on before realizing I was still watching. I didn't send it yet. I waited. Because this wasn't about shock. It was about timing. At midnight, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. One line. "They're coming after your license." I stared at the message, then smiled. I was right. They weren't just trying to destroy my marriage. They were trying to destroy me quietly, cleanly, professionally. But they forgot one thing. I had been quiet for too long. And now I had nothing left to lose. The morning after the text, I got a notice from the ethics board. It wasn't official, just a courtesy communication. But I knew what it meant. Alex had filed a complaint. Not through legal channels, he was too careful for that, but through a friend. A mutual contact at the board, someone who owed him a favor. They were calling it concern for professional conduct. Translation: character assassination. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I forwarded the complaint to my lawyer, Grace Lynn. We weren't close, but she owed me, and I never called in debts lightly. 10 minutes later, she called back. "They're trying to box you in," she said flatly. "Get ahead of it. File first." With everything. I already started, I told her. "But there's one piece I'm waiting on." "You've got 48 hours max," she warned. "After that, they won't need facts. Just noise." I hung up, opened my laptop, and started organizing the files. They didn't just take my name off the trust. They funneled client assets through side accounts. They hosted joint meetings with firms that were direct competitors. And they used my signature on at least 2 amendments I never saw. It wasn't just betrayal. It was fraud. By noon, I received another message. This time from Jenna, an intern who'd once worked under both of us. She was young, nervous, and had no reason to stick her neck out. But she did. "Mia, I overheard something. They're going to claim you falsified tax reports. Said they found evidence. Be careful." That was the moment I realized how far they were willing to go. Not just character defamation. They were planting landmines. So I pulled out the last card I'd been saving. A backup folder Alex didn't know existed. Encrypted. Buried deep in cloud storage. Inside, every signed document from the last 3 years. With metadata. It proved exactly what I needed, my absence. On every file they claimed I authorized, the system registered my account as inactive. One amendment was timestamped while I was in another state, speaking at a conference. Another included my signature, but not from my device. It was forgery. Plain and provable. I packaged the files. Sent one version to Grace. Another to the State Bar. And one to the press. That last one wasn't about exposure. It was a warning shot. At 4 p.m. Alex called. I let it ring. He called again. Then texted. "What are you doing? We can fix this. It's not too late." I didn't answer. I sent him a copy of the bar complaint and nothing else. An hour later, Lauren called. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail I didn't listen to, because I already knew the tone. She was the voice of damage control. The following morning, a reporter from a mid-tier legal journal emailed me. Not to ask for comment, but to verify the documents. Grace had sent them anonymously. The reporter connected the dots. "I'm not looking to ruin anyone," she wrote. "I just want the truth." That's when I knew it was working. Not the revenge, the clarity. They weren't scared of me. They were scared of being seen. Because beneath all the charm and PR smiles, they'd built their power on shadows, quiet manipulation, reputation games, whispers behind doors. Now the doors were open. That afternoon, I walked into the Vaughn Foundation building alone. The same office where Alex once told me, "We don't need paper trails when there's trust." Now every trail led back to him. The receptionist looked up, startled. She didn't stop me. I walked straight to the boardroom, opened the glass doors, and stepped inside. They were in the middle of a planning session: Alex, Lauren, 3 junior partners, a consultant from the firm we'd co-founded. Conversations stopped. Chairs shifted. I placed a sealed envelope on the table. "This is a formal request for a full audit," I said. "Effective immediately. Any attempt to interfere will be submitted as obstruction." Alex stood slowly. "You don't have that authority anymore. You revoked it illegally," I replied. "And the trust clause states clearly, any action taken in bad faith voids that revocation." Lauren leaned forward. "You're destroying everything we built." "No," I said. "I'm cleaning it." No one moved. "I suggest you get ahead of it," I added. "Because the audit starts Monday. And you'll want to be prepared for what's coming." Then I turned and left. That night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment with a cold coffee and the city humming quietly below. The case wasn't over. The war was just beginning. But for the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. And they were finally playing my game. 3 days after I delivered the audit demand, I received the subpoena. They didn't even try to hide it. Vaughn and Wallace, LLP, was suing me for breach of fiduciary duty, reputational damage, and unauthorized interference with ongoing financial operations. It was desperation disguised as legal strategy. A smokescreen. They were trying to drag me into court first, to control the narrative. But they forgot I was already inside the fire. I forwarded the suit to Grace, who answered with only 2 words. Let's go. The hearing was set for Friday morning, civil court downtown. I arrived early. Not for optics. For positioning. I knew who would be there. Lauren, rigid, calculating, press ready. Alex, less sure, but just rehearsed enough to fake moral fatigue. Their lawyer, Colin Hartwell, was a familiar name. Expensive, loud, overconfident. What they didn't expect was what I brought. Not just Grace, who walked in with a calm that made people sit straighter. Not just the documents, clearly printed, chronologically bound. But the one witness they hadn't calculated, Camille Barrett. Camille used to be one of their assistants. Fired 2 months ago for redundancy. She'd reached out to me quietly the day before, asking if what she knew still mattered. It did. The judge entered. No small talk. The room settled like a sealed chamber. Colin spoke first, arguing that I had undermined the structural integrity of the trust by filing complaints without notifying the current managing partners. Grace followed. Your Honor, the managing partners in question acquired that position through forged documents, backdated amendments, and misappropriated digital access, evidence of which is presented in Exhibits A through F. She didn't dramatize. She didn't need to. The documents spoke louder than either of us. The judge flipped through the file, silent. Then she asked, who had final signatory rights at the time of the alleged amendments? Grace answered, my client. And who initiated their removal? Grace slid a page forward. Her husband. With digital confirmation from an IP address traced to his assistant's work laptop. Eyes in the room shifted. Lauren didn't blink. Then Camille stepped forward. The judge narrowed her gaze. And you are? I was their administrative coordinator, Camille said clearly. I witnessed Mr. Vaughn logging into his wife's secure profile. He said it was to correct a few access issues. Did you object? I didn't know what he was doing at the time, but I saved a backup of the session. It's on that USB. Grace handed it over. Colin shifted in his chair. This is hearsay. It's screen recorded, Camille replied. With timestamps. Check the metadata. The judge plugged it into the bench monitor. Watched in silence as Alex's cursor navigated my dashboard, accessed legal files, and exported restricted documents. When the clip ended, the room was dead quiet. Defense will prepare a formal rebuttal, Colin said quickly. You'll do better than that, the judge replied. By recess, the tone had changed. Lauren wouldn't meet my eyes. Alex sat hunched forward, hands clasped too tightly. I knew what was next. They would pivot. Offer settlement. Frame it as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But I wasn't looking for a payout. I wanted the record to reflect the truth. And more than that, I wanted them stripped of control. After lunch, Grace called for removal of both Alex and Lauren from any administrative oversight of the trust, citing breach of agreement, misconduct, and intentional misrepresentation. She supported the claim with email chains, recorded board calls, and bank transfers from the trust to Lauren's private consulting firm. None of it was speculation. Every line had a date, a signature, a purpose. Even the judge looked momentarily stunned. Over $180,000 in reallocated funds without authorization? No authorization. No disclosure, Grace confirmed. It was disguised as vendor services. Colin tried to claim it was standard outsourcing. Grace pulled up a vendor invoice marked Personal Branding Strategy, Lauren Tate. The description, Reputation Rehabilitation and Digital Presence Realignment. It was over. The judge leaned back, then delivered it without ceremony. Effective immediately, all fiduciary control reverts to Mia Vaughn. The court finds sufficient cause to pursue damages for misappropriated funds. Further investigation into regulatory violations is recommended. Vaughn and Wallace LLP will enter audit compliance within 14 business days. She turned to me. Ms. Vaughn, your trust has been reestablished. You are within your rights to pursue civil recovery. I didn't respond. Not in that moment. But something inside me loosened. A thread that had been pulled taut for months finally slackened. Outside the courthouse, the air was sharp with October cold. Reporters waited. Cameras flashed. I didn't stop for interviews. I walked straight through the noise, past Alex standing frozen at the curb, past Lauren scrolling furiously on her phone, past Colin arguing with someone over Bluetooth. They'd built a narrative without me. Now they were just trying to survive mine. 2 days after the ruling, the silence became heavier than the noise had ever been. No calls. No statements. No follow-ups from Alex or Lauren. I thought it would feel like a finish line. It didn't. Because it never really ends when the damage is personal. Reclaiming the trust meant reclaiming my mother's name, my own authority, my place in something they tried to bury. But it didn't undo the smear campaigns, the whispered lies, or the people who chose not to look deeper. Some bridges don't burn, they're just quietly dismantled, piece by piece, while you're still standing on them. That Monday, Grace sent me a draft for civil restitution. She estimated the recovery could push into 7 figures. It sounded satisfying on paper. But there was one problem: most of those funds would come out of employees' pockets. Assistants, junior partners, interns. People who didn't make decisions but stayed silent to protect their jobs. I couldn't punish them for being scared. So I crossed out the bulk of the claim, left only what had been personally rerouted by Alex and Lauren, and instructed Grace to mark it non-negotiable. They needed consequences, not a crater. Later that afternoon, I got a message from someone unexpected, Jenna, the intern who'd warned me weeks ago. She asked if we could talk. I agreed. We met at a quiet coffee shop near the harbor. She was already there when I arrived, phone face down, hands wrapped around a paper cup. "I just wanted to say thank you," she began, eyes steady. "Most people would have destroyed everyone involved. You didn't." I didn't answer right away. "I wasn't trying to be noble," I said finally. "I just wanted to stop the rot before it reached someone else." She nodded. "You did. And people are talking. But not in the way Lauren hoped. They're questioning everything now." That stuck with me. Not revenge. Not vindication. Awareness. That was the crack they feared the most. The following morning, an envelope appeared at my door. No postage, just slid under with a quiet deliberation. Inside was a letter, handwritten, short. "Mia, I won't apologize. You wouldn't believe it anyway. But I need you to know this was never about love. It was about fear. You always saw things too clearly. That made you dangerous. I didn't react. Not with anger. Not even with pity. Just confirmation. They'd mistaken clarity for threat. Because people who live behind masks can't stand someone who refuses to wear one. By midweek, I met with the board of the foundation, my board now. Half of them had once voted to sideline me. Now they sat, uncomfortable, fidgeting, unsure of where we stood. I let them. Then I handed out a printed agenda and said, "We're going to restructure everything." Over the next 2 hours, I outlined reforms. Transparent reporting. Rotating leadership. Grants based on merit, not name. One board member, Davis, cleared his throat halfway through. Why no? Because for too long, this place belonged to people who treated legacy like a trophy. That ends today. They didn't applaud. I didn't need them to. They took notes. And that was enough. That evening, I returned home and opened the secure drive Grace had helped me set up. Inside were 3 folders. Legal, closed. Trust, active. Personal, pending. I opened the last one. It held one document: application, community education grant. Filed under Bridget Von Dorian. Bryn. Alex's daughter. Lauren's stepchild. She hadn't spoken to me since the day everything fell apart. But a few weeks before the hearing, she'd submitted the application anonymously. Grace flagged it after noticing the surname. It was clean. No special requests. No shortcuts. Just ambition, need, and silence. I sat with it for 20 minutes. Then I approved it, full funding. No acknowledgement required. Because what her parents did had nothing to do with her. And cycles only break when someone refuses to repeat them. The next morning, I visited my mother's grave. There were no flowers. No audience. Just time. I knelt, touched the stone lightly. "They tried," I said aloud. "But I remembered what you told me. You don't fight dirt with dirt. You outlast it." The wind picked up, sharp but clean. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing in the shadow of something broken. I was just standing. A week passed. Then another. Emails slowed. Journalists moved on. Alex issued a vague public statement: personal differences, unfortunate misunderstandings. Lauren disappeared from her firm's website entirely. But I didn't chase headlines. Instead, I took a meeting with a small nonprofit that helped women recover from legal abuse, those whose assets, reputations, and lives were nearly erased by people they trusted. They asked if I wanted to consult. I said no. Then I asked if they had space for a full-time partner. 3 months passed. By then, most people had moved on. The scandal faded, buried under newer headlines and shinier gossip. But I hadn't moved on, I'd moved forward. The nonprofit brought structure back into my life. Every day, I sat across from women who had been silenced, discredited, or rewritten by someone they trusted. Their stories weren't identical to mine, but their patterns were. Erase, replace, dismiss, and then tell the world she was never really there to begin with. It wasn't therapy. It was action. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to defend who I was. I just needed to listen and make sure no one else lost everything in the quiet. One afternoon, Ruth called. She didn't ask how I was. She knew better than that. She just said, "I ran into Alex today." I didn't respond. "He looked like a man running out of doors to knock on," she added. "Said he wanted to reach you." "He already did," I said. "When it was too late." I told him, "You're not someone you reach anymore. You're someone you follow if you're lucky." I smiled at that, just a little. Ruth always knew when to say something sharp enough to matter, but soft enough to leave no scar. A week later, a package arrived. No name, no note. Just a return address I recognized from Alex's brother's law firm. Inside was a small box, wrapped in gray paper, no flair. I hesitated, then opened it. There was a USB drive, a folded letter, and a single item I hadn't seen in over a year, a keychain my mother gave us when we bought our first house. One of the only things I didn't take when I left. I ignored the nostalgia. I read the letter instead. "Mia, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect acknowledgement. But you were right. About the documents. About the trust. About me." I tried to hold on to something I didn't earn, and when I started to lose control, I blamed the one person who never once lied to me. "You didn't destroy me." I did. I don't know if I'll ever rebuild. But if I do, it'll be with less ego and more silence. Thank you for leaving the door closed. I don't deserve to walk through it. Alex. There was no apology. Just clarity. Which, in a way, was cleaner. I put the keychain in a drawer and the letter in a file labeled closure. I didn't need either of them out in the open. One morning, I received an unexpected call from Bryn. She didn't use her last name when she introduced herself. Just Bryn. Her voice shook slightly at first, then steadied. "I know what you did," she said. "With the grant." I didn't say anything. I don't know if you did it to make a point or to make peace, but either way, I needed to say thank you. "I did it because you deserved a clean start," I told her. She paused. "Even after everything? I don't hold you responsible for the war your parents started. But I won't pretend it didn't affect me either." "I wouldn't ask you to," she said. And that was the end of the conversation. No awkward attempts to rebuild something that was never real. Just two people finally speaking the same language. By the end of the year, the trust was fully restructured. The audits were closed. The board was reformed. Lauren was still under financial investigation. Alex had quietly resigned from every board seat and withdrawn from the public circuit. There were no headlines this time. No press statements. Just absence. That was the difference between scandal and consequence. One gets attention. The other leaves a mark. One evening, as I reviewed a final set of grant applications, a message popped into my inbox. Subject line, Legacy Proposal. Sender, Charleston School of Law. It was an invitation to speak at a panel titled, "When the Law Protects the Wrong People." At the bottom, a note from the program director. "We've followed your work. What you did was quiet, measured, and necessary. We'd be honored to have you open the session." For the first time in a long while, I said yes to something without second-guessing it. Not for attention, but because young lawyers needed to understand. Justice doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it shows up with paper trails, late nights, and the refusal to sit down when it's easier to stay quiet. On the night of the panel, I stood behind the curtain, watching the seats fill in. I wasn't nervous, because this wasn't about me anymore. It was about what came after. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel since the day it all collapsed, peace without condition. Final line. They tried to erase me. But I didn't need revenge. I needed truth. And now it speaks for itself. It started with a message from a name I hadn't seen in 5 years. Caroline Bishop. We'd shared a courtroom once, two junior litigators, fresh off a messy pro bono case where no one really won. She'd been sharp, careful, and ambitious enough to make me uneasy. We didn't stay in touch. Her email was short. Mia, I've been asked to review the asset trail from the Vaughn audit. Something's off. I thought you should know. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time. The case was closed. The trust was clean. The foundation was operating under full compliance. Or so I'd believed. We met at a small legal conference in Atlanta 2 days later. The city buzzed with its usual urgency, but we sat at the edge of it, tucked into a corner of the second-floor cafe that overlooked a courtyard. Caroline didn't waste time. I'm reviewing flagged nonprofit transfers for the AG's office, she said. Your case came up. Not because of the ruling. Because of something that happened after. What kind of something? 2 payments. Large. One to a dormant LLC in Delaware. Another routed through a consulting firm in D.C. Both tied to your trust. But neither were part of the original recovery or allocation. She slid her laptop across the table. There they were, 2 transfers made post-ruling. 1 week after I regained full control. Both authorized. Both stamped with my approval. Except I never signed off on them. I didn't sleep that night. Back at my hotel, I went through every file, every transaction I'd personally reviewed since the trust was reinstated. Everything matched except those 2. They'd been initiated from an IP in Charleston. From a device that once belonged to my foundation account administrator. A woman named Celeste. I hadn't seen her in weeks. I sent her a message the next morning. No response. 2 hours later, her company bio was gone. She'd vanished. Grace took it from there. She launched a full internal review, including the IT audit we'd originally tabled. Within 48 hours, she uncovered 3 more red flags, consulting agreements signed without board approval, invoices that never matched services, and digital logins that traced back to ghost accounts. This isn't just fraud, she said. This is someone testing the system. Quietly. Slowly. Why no? I asked. Because they think you're distracted. Settled. Done. She was right. I'd exhaled too soon. I called a meeting with the board. This time, no one looked down. No one shuffled papers. They listened. I showed them the documents, the patterns, the silence between each transaction. I thought the fight ended in court, I said. But fights don't end. They shift. I gave them a choice: full transparency or full shutdown. They chose transparency. And then I fired everyone who had access to legacy accounts. No ceremony. No warnings. If you touched something you shouldn't have, you didn't get a second meeting. You were out. 2 days later, I received a private email from an anonymous account. No greeting. No threat. Just a question. You really think justice can't be rewritten again? I didn't answer. But I saved the message. Because it told me what I needed to know. Someone had expected me to quit once I won. And now they were testing the edges of my victory. I worked nonstop for the next week. Reviewed every case the foundation had funded. Every scholarship. Every payroll log. And I found it. A slow siphon. 3 interns. 2 contract researchers. 1 strategic partner. All recommended by one former board member, Davis. The one who had asked, why now? Turns out, he already knew the answer. Grace drafted the cease and desist. I added a civil suit on top of it. When the lawsuit went public, it barely made a ripple. No headlines. No panel discussions. But the impact was immediate. Other nonprofits started pulling back, reviewing their own structures. 2 of them contacted me directly, asking for my compliance template. Another asked if I'd serve on an advisory panel. I said yes to all of them. Because truth doesn't stay clean just because you scrub it once. You maintain it. You guard it. You build it into something no one can fake. By month's end, the trust was re-verified. The foundation's books were independently audited. Every stolen cent was recovered. And Celeste? She resurfaced. Not in Charleston. Not even in the U.S. But her name came up on an international NGO board based in Zurich. I didn't chase it. I didn't need to. People like her never stay in one place long enough to matter. And if she tried the same again, there'd be records now. Names. Flags. She was done. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. The final report from Grace sat on the table, neat, complete, conclusive. And I realized something I hadn't said out loud. Winning isn't a moment. It's a series of decisions made after the noise has died down. Final line. They thought I wanted closure. But I wanted something harder to erase, continuity with integrity. That's the part they never planned for. I didn't expect the letter. It came in the middle of a Monday, in a plain white envelope addressed to my office. No return name, but the address was familiar: Wilmington, North Carolina. I hadn't been there in years. I opened it without ceremony, expecting paperwork, maybe a generic donation request. Instead, I found handwriting. Tight, angled, cautious. Mia, you don't know me, but I knew your mother. I worked with her during the Charleston Affordable Housing Initiative in 2006. She once said, "Build the thing they think you'll never survive without them." I've watched you do just that. There's a file you should see. It belonged to her. She kept it off the record. I've kept it safe. If you're willing, meet me at the Coastal Library Archives, Wilmington. Saturday. Noon. E.D. No last name. No details. Just that. I read it twice. Then again. Something in me tightened, not fear, but the sense of a door opening somewhere I hadn't knocked in years. By Saturday, I was standing on the top floor of the archive building, staring down a row of metal cabinets labeled by year and category. There was only one other person in the room, an older man with silver hair and a slow, deliberate way of moving. He looked up as I approached. "You're her daughter," he said. Not a question. "I am." He nodded once, then pulled a worn folder from a locked drawer. "Your mother gave this to me the year before she died. Said not to give it back unless you ever found yourself rebuilding something she'd once started." He handed it over without ceremony. No explanation, no preamble. I took it. Inside were copies of land transfer agreements, internal memos from housing boards, and dozens of handwritten notes. Names, dates, private loans, construction contracts, every detail of a deal that had never made it to the public eye. I scanned the final page and froze. My mother had written, "If you're reading this, Mia, it means you survived the fire. Don't just recover. Finish what I couldn't." Back in Charleston, I reviewed the file in full. It outlined a project my mother had nearly completed, a transitional housing complex for single women with children, specifically those coming out of domestic legal battles. She'd secured partial funding, identified land, even drafted agreements with 2 silent partners. But then came the trust battle. Then cancer. Then everything stopped. The foundation had never mentioned it. Neither had Alex. And now I knew why. Because the land her project was tied to? It was sold 3 years ago to a holding company registered under Vaughn Family Holdings. Alex had liquidated it quietly, then buried the transaction in bundled property listings. He'd erased her blueprint the same way he'd tried to erase me. I called Grace immediately. "This isn't about restitution," I said. "It's about repair." Within a week, we traced the holding company to a dormant LLC, still technically inactive, still reclaimable. All I had to do was file a purchase notice with attached evidence of original intent. As next of kin and current trustee, I had standing. So I did. The land was mine within 10 days. Not because they let it go, but because they never thought I'd dig that far back. People like Alex plan for revenge. They don't plan for memory. By spring, the architectural plans were redrawn. Permits approved. A new project began. The Celia Initiative. Not flashy. Not political, just functional. Each unit was designed with legal support spaces, trauma-informed counseling access, and short-term childcare rooms built into the structure. Not a shelter. A restart. The kind my mother envisioned. The kind I nearly needed myself. The day construction started, Ruth stood beside me as the ground was broken. "They're going to ask why you didn't name it after yourself," she said. "They'll figure it out," I replied. Because legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about making sure someone else doesn't have to fight the same war to be seen. 3 weeks later, I received one last letter. It was from Alex. Postmarked from Oregon. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "Mia, I heard what you're building. You became someone I couldn't control. That's why I turned you into the villain. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed you to know I finally understand why your mother never trusted easy. I hope one day Bryn walks into something you built and never knows you were the one who made sure the lights stayed on. That would be the real win." I folded the letter once and tucked it into a box labeled unfinished business. Then I crossed out the label and wrote done instead. Final line. My mother built the foundation. They tried to bury it. I turned it into a home someone else could live in. And that's the only revenge I ever needed.